Chapter 4, Lesson 2, The Virginia Colony. What to know? Why did English settlers come to North America, and where did they settle first? Learn how the Virginia colony was settled. Describe the relations between the settlers and American Indians. And these are things that you can look for and add to your notes. Please review in Quizlet. Raw material, stock, cash crop, indentured servant, legislature, represent, established church, royal colony, governor. And people that we'll see in this section: Queen Elizabeth I, John Smith, Pocahontas, John Wolfe. Places: Roanoke Island and Jamestown. You are there. We're getting off here, your friend shouts. The year is 1587. You and 116 other settlers are on ships anchored off Roanoke Island, off the coast of present-day North Carolina. Earlier, English settlers had built homes and a fort on Roanoke, but they didn't like the island. They all went home to England. Maybe we'll be able to use the houses they built, you say as you gaze at your new home. Still, you do not have a good feeling about this place. Dun, dun, dun. And that is Queen Elizabeth I of England. When John White returned to Roanoke Island, he found that the settlers were gone and that the word Croatian had been carved into a post. This is still a great mystery today. The lost colony of Roanoke. The lost colony, and please use this as a heading for your notes. England saw that Spain had become wealthy as a result of its colonies in the Americas. Wanting to share in that wealth, Queen Elizabeth I of England encouraged her sea captains to attack Spanish treasure ships. The captured treasures increased England's wealth, and it became a powerful country. Like many of its European neighbors, England wanted to set up colonies around the world. English leaders knew they would benefit from the lumber and other raw materials the colonies could provide. A raw material is a resource that can be used to make a product. In 1584, Queen Elizabeth I told Walter Raleigh to set up a colony in North America. A year later, Raleigh sent about 100 colonists to Roanoke Island, in an area he named Virginia. The first colonists did not stay long. They ran low on food, and when another English ship arrived, all the settlers left. John White led another group of settlers who arrived at Roanoke Island in 1587. These settlers also ran low on food, and they faced attacks by American Indians. White went back to England to get food and supplies, but by the time he returned, 3 years later, all the settlers were gone. What happened to the settlers remains a mystery. Some historians think they went to live with the Indians on Croatian Island because the word Croatian, or Croatoan, was found carved on a post. Others believe that the settlers were killed in a battle with Indians. Who knows? Roanoke became known as the Lost Colony. So what were some of the reasons England wanted to start colonies in North America? Go back and make sure you have that in your notes. Jamestown, 1607. Jamestown, Virginia. Even though both of the settlements at Roanoke Island had failed, some English merchants wanted to start a new colony in Virginia. With the permission of King James I, these merchants set up the Virginia Company. The Virginia Company was owned by many people, each of whom had been given money to set up the company. In return, each owner had received stock, or a share of ownership in the company. Kind of like our stock market now, where people buy stock and own a small part of a company. The owners hoped the company would make a profit, would make some money, because if it did, each owner would make money. And there's John Smith. In 1607, 3 ships sent by the Virginia Company sailed into the deep bay now called Chesapeake Bay. These ships carried 105 colonists, all of whom were men. The first women colonists did not arrive until 1619. The new settlers sailed up a river they named the James River in honor of their king. They chose a spot along the shore and began to build a settlement they called Jamestown. Jamestown's location turned out to be a poor choice for a settlement. Wah, wah, wah. The land was low and swampy. Swamps meant mosquitoes, and mosquitoes could carry deadly diseases. Many of the colonists were not used to farm work, which is kind of important if you want to eat, and they did not know how to hunt and fish in this unfamiliar land, which is pretty important if you want to eat. They had come to Virginia to get rich, and they were so busy looking for gold that no one bothered to plant or gather food. When the food they had brought ran out, there was little to eat. During their first winter, more than half the colonists died. Jamestown might have become another Roanoke if it had not been for Captain John Smith, a soldier, explorer, and writer. When he became leader of Jamestown, he made an important rule for the colonists. Anyone who did not work did not eat. The colonists were soon busy planting gardens, building shelters, and putting up palisades to protect Jamestown from Indian attacks. During this time, more than 30 tribes of Eastern Woodlands Indians lived in Virginia. Most belonged to the Powhatan Confederacy, whose members were united under one main chief. When the colonists heard this, they gave the name Powhatan to all the tribes as well as to the chief. From the start, there were conflicts between the Powhatan and the colonists. The colonists often stole Powhatan crops. These thefts led to fighting, during which both sides would capture people. One day, while exploring, Captain Smith was captured. A legend says that Chief Powhatan ordered Smith to be killed, but the chief's daughter, Pocahontas, saved his life. Historians do not know for sure if this story is true, but there was a short-lived peace between the colonists and the Powhatan Confederacy. During this time, both groups cooperated by trading goods. So reading check, how did John Smith contribute to the survival of the Jamestown settlement? See what else you can add to your notes. And let's look at this Jamestown. This drawing shows what Jamestown may have looked like in the early 1600s. The first settlers built the fort. As more settlers came, additional homes were built outside the fort. So this is a 2-page spread, which is hard to show here. But look for the pasture, the crops, the cannon, the dock, James River, the church, and the fort. Go back to the previous page so you can see it. So in your own books, make sure you can locate all those items. Why do you think the colonists built Jamestown near the James River? The next section, please label this in your notes. growth and change. Because living conditions at Jamestown continued to be a problem, many people died in the colony's early years. However, more colonists arrived each year, so the population grew. In time, the colonists even found a way to make a profit. It was not gold that made Jamestown successful, but a crop called tobacco. A Jamestown leader named John Wolfe experimented with growing different kinds of tobacco. By 1613, Wolfe had found a West Indian tobacco that proved to be very popular in England. The colonists at Jamestown were soon growing tobacco as a cash crop, a crop that people grew to sell. The Virginia Company made a lot of money selling its tobacco all over Europe. Farmers grew tobacco on plantations that spread out around Jamestown. Growing tobacco required many workers, so the Virginia Company offered to pay for people's passages or trips to Virginia. In exchange, the people agreed to work without pay for a certain length of time, usually 4 to 7 years. After that time, these indentured servants, these are the people who agreed to work for a certain period of time, after that, the people were given their freedom. In 1619, the first Africans arrived in Jamestown. Historians do not know for sure whether these workers were treated as indentured servants or as slaves. In time, however, Virginia's economy came to rely more on enslaved workers, and more Africans were brought to the colony and forced to work as slaves. So just like in the Spanish colonies, they first relied on the Native Americans for labor and then started importing Africans as slaves. In Jamestown, they first relied on indentured servants or poor people from England who came to work off the cost of their trip. And when that didn't lead to enough workers, then the English colonies also then at this point began to import African slaves. Why was slavery introduced into Virginia? Dutch traders sold the first Americans to Jamestown colonists in 1619. Democratic institutions. The House of Burgesses helped establish the belief that people could govern themselves. In the early 1600s, the people of England had a king, but they also had some elected leaders. The elected leaders made the laws in a lawmaking group called Parliament. The Virginia House of Burgesses was modeled after the English Parliament. Members of the House of Burgesses met once a year to make laws for the Virginia colony and to decide on taxes. Electing a legislature to make decisions for the people continues to be an important right that Americans have today. In our next section, please label it Early Government. By 1619, the Virginia colony had more than 1,000 colonists. With so many people, the colony needed laws to keep order. The Virginia Company said the colonists could have the same rights as people living in England. As a result, the colonists chose to set up a legislature or a lawmaking branch of government. Virginia's legislature, called the House of Burgesses, first met in 1619. It was the first representative assembly in the English colonies. Now, colonists could elect members to represent or speak for them in the government. Only men who owned property could become members and vote in the House of Burgesses. Women, indentured servants, poor people, and slaves were not allowed to hold office or even to vote. The House of Burgesses passed several laws for Virginia. One law said that everyone had to go to church on Sundays. In Virginia, religion and government were not separate. Virginia had an established church, or a church supported by the government. In Virginia, this was the Church of England, also called the Anglican Church, and today we would call it the Episcopal Church in America. Laws and taxes supported the Church of England. So what is the difference between an established church and a non-established church? What is an established church? Make sure you have that in your notes. And to conclude this section, this engraving shows Chief Powhatan. The Powhatan Wars. As more colonists arrived in Virginia, they continued to spread out into Powhatan lands. The Powhatans had already lost much of their land. In 1622, the Powhatans attacked and killed more than 340 colonists in order to defend their land. The colonists fought back in a series of wars, pushing the Powhatans back and taking over their remaining lands. The bloody Powhatan Wars and the deaths of the Virginia Company led King James I to take over Virginia, making it a royal colony. This meant that the king owned the colony. To help run the colony, the king picked a governor who shared power with the House of Burgesses. So what led to the Powhatan Wars? And in summary, starting in the 1580s, England set up colonies in North America. The Virginia colony developed slowly. As the colony grew, slavery was introduced and the Powhatan Wars were fought. And questions for group discussion. Why did English settlers come to North America, and where did they settle first? Use the term royal colony in a sentence about Virginia. What was the job of the House of Burgesses? How did the relative location of Jamestown make life difficult for the English settlers? How do you think the Africans who were brought to Virginia felt? And as a creative project, if you're interested, write a persuasive letter. Write a letter to persuade people to settle in the Virginia colony. Be sure to describe the benefits of living in Virginia.